Exodus in chapter 32, in verse 26, Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, "Who's on Yah's side? Let him come unto me." And all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together unto him. In other words, it was the tribe of Levi that did not participate in the sin of the golden calf. So they're the ones who gathered themselves unto Moses. And he says, "Thus says Yahweh Elohim of Israel, put every man his sword by his side and go in and out from gate to gate throughout the camp, and slay every man his brother, and every man his companion, and every man his neighbor." And the children of Israel did according to the word of Moses, and there fell of the people that day about 3,000 men. So this is a Torah lesson of the consequences of participating in the sin of the golden calf, which, as we can see in Exodus chapter 32, verse 5, it was mixed worship of the festivals. Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow is a feast to the Lord." So from this, Yah called out, and he said that the office of the high priesthood is going to come from Aaron and his sons. So in Exodus chapter 28 and verse 1, it says, "Take thou unto thee Aaron your brother and his sons with him from among the children of Israel, that he may minister unto me in the priest's office. Even Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, Ithamar, Aaron's sons." So Aaron has 4 sons: Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. But Nadab and Abihu, they end up offering strange fire. And so what that is, it's improper worship of the God of Israel. It's mixed worship of the God of Israel. So they became the example of the consequence of mixed worship. So Yah took their lives to show Israel, you do things the way I tell you to do things, and don't mix it with other things. And so then, who was left then, following Aaron to minister in the office of the high priesthood, was Eleazar and Ithamar. And so then, we are told regarding Eleazar's son Phinehas, or Pinhas, in Numbers in chapter 25. And the children of Israel committed sin in the camp, and with the Moabite women, and who stood up against this and opposed this was Phinehas. And so from his noble deed in standing up against the sin in Israel that they did regarding the Moabite women, we are then told the following in Numbers chapter 25, verse 10. Yahweh spoke unto Moses, saying, "Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, has turned my wrath away from the children of Israel, because he was zealous of my sake among them, that I consume not the children of Israel in my jealousy. Wherefore, behold, I will give unto him a covenant of peace." Then pay attention to this. "He will have it, and his seed after him, even the covenant of an everlasting priesthood." So it was a promise that was made to Phinehas, who is a son of Eleazar, that through his line there would be an everlasting priesthood. And now there is a Torah lesson regarding the importance and the significance that the office of the high priesthood was to be who Yah designated. Who was that? Aaron and his sons. So in Numbers, in chapter 16, in verse 1, it says Korah, and it says he was a Levite. So Korah is a Levite, but he's not a son of Aaron. Aaron's a Levite, and Korah is a Levite. However, Korah is not of the lineage of Aaron. It's from the lineage of Aaron that we have the priest among the Levites over the nation of Israel. So not only do we have Korah, but we have in Numbers chapter 16, verse 2, we have 250 princes of the assembly, famous in the congregation, men of renown. So these are the highest and best and respective leaders and teachers of the people. And they come and they make a request unto Moses, and they really wanted something. And Moses reveals what they want. And what they wanted is specified in Numbers chapter 16, verse 10. But the way in which they did it was a manipulative way. Because they come to Moses, oh, Moses, like, you're taking on too much. We can help you out. We want to help you. Okay? So, it says in verse 3, they gathered themselves together against Moses, against Aaron. They said, oh, you take too much upon yourself. And don't you understand? We all can serve Yah. We all can be teachers. All the congregation is holy. You need to include us too. So, you're not being fair. Because all the congregation is holy. So, why do you want to be special in the eyes of the people? We can help and we can teach them as well. So, that's what they said in Numbers chapter 16 and verse 3. And when this happened, Moses said to Korah in verse 8, hear, I pray you, you sons of Levi. Verse 9, is it a small thing unto you that the God of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to do the service of the tabernacle, to stand before the congregation and minister unto him? And catch verse 10. And he brought you near unto him and all your brethren, the sons of Levi. But you seek the priesthood also? Moses says, wait a second. You want to be the priests? You have been honored, the tribe of Levi has been honored to do the service of the tabernacle. The other tribes are not doing the service of the tabernacle. It's just the tribes of Levi, and you're a Levite. And so you don't value that honor that Yah has given you, but you want the priesthood as well? And so actually this request is a rebellion against the God of Israel himself. Because in what way did Aaron and his sons get that office? Did they get it because they deserved it? No. How did it come? It came by a decree of the God of Israel. It was a statute. It was a hoke. It was because he said so. So if you're going to respect the authority that he put in place, respecting the authority is respecting him. Disrespecting the authority is disrespecting the God of Israel. And this was a disrespect of the God of Israel because they're not honoring his decree that the office of the high priesthood is unto Aaron and his sons. So the God of Israel is not going to tolerate the whole nation witnessing this rebellion against him, so he had to bring judgment against it. And so he did. And so this is how it happened. In Numbers chapter 16, verse 28, and Moses said, hereby you shall know that Yahweh has sent me to do all these works, for I have not done them of my own mind, or of my own choosing, or of my own will. If these men die the common death of all men, or if they be visited after the visitation of all men, then Yah has not sent me. But if Yah makes a new thing, and the earth opens her mouth and swallow them up, with all those that pertain unto them, and they go down quick in the pit, then you will understand that these men have provoked Yahweh. And it came to pass, as he had made an end of speaking all these words, that the ground cleaved asunder that was under them, and the earth opened up her mouth and swallowed them up, and their houses, and all the men that appertained unto Korah, and all their goods. So the rebellion was judged. And so it's a lesson to the nation of Israel, is that the office of the high priesthood is to be from Aaron and his sons. Now, in order to amplify this lesson, in Numbers chapter 17, verse 1, Yah said to Moses, "Speak to the children of Israel, and take of every one of them a rod, according to the house of their fathers. Of all their princes, according to the house of their fathers, 12 rods, and write every man's name upon his rod. And you shall write Aaron's name upon the rod of Levi, for 1 rod shall be for the head of the house of their fathers. And you shall lay them up in the tabernacle of the congregation in front of the testimony, where I will meet with you. And it will come to pass that the man's rod whom I will choose shall blossom, and I will make to cease from me the murmurings of the children of Israel, whereby they murmur against me." And Moses spake unto the children of Israel, and every one of the princes gave him a rod, for each prince 1, according to their fathers' houses, each 12 rods, and the rod of Aaron was among the rods. And Moses laid up the rods before Yahweh in the tabernacle of wilderness. And it came to pass that on the morrow Moses went into the tabernacle of witness, and behold, the rod of Aaron for the house of Levi was budded, and brought forth buds, and it blossomed, and it bloomed blossoms, and it yielded almonds. And Moses brought out all the rods from before Yahweh unto the children of Israel, and they looked and took every man his rod. And Yahweh said to Moses, "Bring Aaron's rod again before the tabernacle, to be kept for a sign against the rebels." And so Aaron's rod that budded is a sign to the nation of Israel that the office of the high priesthood is only to come from who Yah declared it would be, and that is Aaron and his sons. And so now I'm going to go over with you some history, and ultimately in the history of Israel, there were those that served in the office of the high priesthood that were not of the sons of Aaron. So when they did, this was a form of a Korah rebellion. And just like it was a very serious matter in the Torah, when it happened, it was a very serious matter to the people of Israel. And so this is related and associated why the community in the Qumran got established. This is related and associated to the historical and cultural setting of the birth of John the Baptist, and the reason why he said, Isaiah chapter 40 verse 3, "I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness," and this is the root of what was a big Jewish religious dispute in the first century, of which we are reading about when we are reading the pages of the New Testament. So now, since we have that Phinehas is promised in eternal priesthood, and Nadab and Abihu, they've been killed for offering strange fire, the only 2 lines that available to serve in the office of the high priesthood is Eleazar and Ithamar. And so of these 2 lines, we have the promise in the Torah that the eternal priesthood is going to be from Eleazar, specifically through Phinehas. So like, what happened to the line of Ithamar? Well, we're going to take up following and understanding that story in that history in 1 Samuel in chapter 2. So in 1 Samuel chapter 2, we're going to read in verse 27. "And there came a man of Yah unto Eli, and said unto him, thus says Yahweh, did I plainly appear unto the house of your father when you were in Egypt in Pharaoh's house? And did I choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to offer upon my altar, to burn incense, to wear an ephod before me? And did I give unto the house of your father all the offerings made by fire unto the children of Israel? So why do you kick at my sacrifice and my offering, which I have commanded in my habitation, and you honor your sons above me, to make yourselves fat with the cheapest of all the offerings of Israel, my people? And so he says, wherefore Yahweh Elohim of Israel says, I said indeed that my house and the house of my father should walk before me forever. But now Yahweh says, be it far from me, for them that honor me I will honor, and they that despise me shall be lightly esteemed. So this is a representation and a picture of a corrupt priesthood. So what did he do with the corrupt sons of Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, when they offered strange fire? He judged them. What did he do when Korah and the 250, they tried to bring themselves into the office of the high priesthood? He judged them. What's going to happen here with this corruption of the office of the priesthood? There's going to be a judgment. So in 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 31, it says, behold, the days come that I will cut off your arm and the arm of your father's house, that there shall not be an old man in the house. So it's a prophecy in cutting off the house. What it means is there's going to come a day that there's not going to be any high priest in Israel that's going to come from the line of Ithamar. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 34. And this shall be a sign. So the prophecy is given, and now we got to have the confirmation of the prophecy. And this shall be a sign unto you, that you shall come unto your two sons, and they will both die in one day. And so we see the fulfillment of the prophecy in 1 Samuel chapter 4 in verse 11. It says, and the ark of Elohim was taken, and the two sons of Phinehas were slain. So now the prophecies were given, the sign of the prophecy. Now we have the fulfillment of the sign. So the prophecy said the day is going to come when in the line of Ithamar that there was no longer going to be high priest. It's going to come from that line in Israel. And so at this point in time, in order to see how that prophecy was fulfilled, the details of how the prophecy got fulfilled takes up in 1 Kings in chapter 1. And the setting of 1 Kings chapter 1 is David is approaching the days of his death. And as he's approaching the days of his death, David's fourth son, Adonijah, he declares himself to be the king following King David. It says in 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 5, that Adonijah, the son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. And he prepared him chariots and horsemen and 50 men to run before him. And then it goes on to say in verse 7, and he conferred with Joab and with Abiathar the priest. Abiathar the priest, and they followed Adonijah, helping him. Verse 8, but Zadok the priest was not with Adonijah. And so here, as we're at the end of David's life, we had Abiathar and Zadok were priests, and initially Abiathar and Zadok they helped and they supported David. But here we see that Abiathar was part of the declaration of Adonijah that he would be king. And so Abiathar knew, by being around King David, that he desired for Solomon to be the king after him. So this was a rebellion and a betrayal against the wishes of King David. However, as we're told here, Zadok the priest did not participate in this rebellion, and it then also tells us that Nathan the prophet as well did not participate in this rebellion. So ultimately, what happens is when Adonijah does this, Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet goes and reports it to David and asks David, now, is this your wishes? Is this your desires that Adonijah is going to be king following you? And King David says, absolutely, totally not. And he says in 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 28, then King David answered and said, call me Bathsheba. And she came into the king's presence and stood before him. And the king said, as Yahweh liveth, that has redeemed my soul out of all distress, even as I swear unto you by the Lord God of Israel, saying, assuredly, Solomon your son shall reign after me, and he will sit upon my throne instead of me, and even I am going to do it this day. So King David said in verse 32, call me Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet. And so they came before the king. And so they were given the instruction to go out and to make declaration that Solomon is going to be king after King David. So in 1 Kings in chapter 1 and verse 45, and Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet have anointed him king in Gihon. And it says in verse 46, and also Solomon sits on the throne of his kingdom. And so if we go to verse 39, and Zadok the priest took a horn of oil out of the tabernacle and anointed Solomon. And they blew the shofar, and all the people said, God save Solomon. And so this was the declaration from the instruction of King David, that Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet would go and declare that Solomon would be king after King David. So when this happened, then Adonijah became afraid, and it says in 1 Kings chapter 1 verse 50, and Adonijah feared because of Solomon. He arose and went, and he caught hold of the horns of the altar. Now, the act of grabbing hold of the horns of the altar is he's pleading for mercy. Okay, so he knows he's in trouble. And so he's basically pleading for mercy. And 1 Kings chapter 1 verse 51, and it was told Solomon saying, Adonijah is afraid that King Solomon is now king, and he went and grabbed a hold of the horns of the altar. And so Solomon says to him, now, if you're innocent, you're going to live. But if what you did was an act of rebellion and you're guilty, then you're going to die. So he told him to go back to his house in 1 Kings chapter 1 and verse 53. So ultimately then, Solomon instructs for the death of Adonijah. And so he dies, and then he goes and he has a conversation with Abiathar. And he tells Abiathar, you know, what you did, you deserve to die as well. However, he says in 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 26, because you bore the ark of Yahweh Elohim before David my father, because of the merit of that, you're going to be shown mercy and you're going to live. And so we gave all of the details of the background of the story to explain to you how the prophecy that was given to Eli the priest, that his house would become desolate, because Eli the priest is of the lineage of Ithamar.
Yes.
So now we are told the following, the conclusion of the matter. In 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 27. You ready for this? So Solomon thrust out Abiathar from being high priest unto Yahweh, that it might fulfill the word of Yahweh which he spoke concerning the house of Eli in Shiloh, back in the book of 1 Samuel. So now, from this day forth, there were no high priests in Israel from the line of Ithamar. So the high priesthood office in Israel is now designated from Eleazar to Phinehas, and in the line of Phinehas is Zadok the priest. And this is Yah's designated eternal priesthood.
Yes.
So it originally was Aaron and then his 4 sons, and then it gets filtered down to Eleazar, and from Eleazar it gets filtered down to Phinehas, and then the line of Phinehas, and it gets filtered down to the line of Zadok. So from this place, going forward, because we're told, once Solomon takes up his throne, in 1 Chronicles in chapter 29 and verse 22, it says that they made Solomon, the son of David, king, and Zadok to be the priest.
Yes.
And so once Solomon starts his rule and reign, we have Zadok being the priest. All right. So now, when Zadok is the priest, when it comes time to celebrate the festivals, it's Zadok the priest that's going to declare when we're going to celebrate the festivals. And which calendar did Zadok the priest tell Israel that they were to follow when it came time to celebrate and keep the festivals? Now let's go to 1 Chronicles in chapter 28. In 1 Chronicles chapter 28, verse 11, it says, Then David gave to Solomon his son the pattern of the porch and the houses thereof, the treasuries, the upper chambers, the inner parlors, and the place of the mercy seat, and the pattern of all that he had by the Ruach, by the Spirit, of the courts of the house of Yahweh, all the chambers, the treasuries, and the treasuries of dedicated things. Verse 13, for the courses of the priests and the Levites, for the service of the house of Yahweh.
Yes.
All right, so the courses of the priests in their service in the tabernacle came from heaven.
Yes.
It was given to David, to Solomon, and Solomon passed it on to Zadok the priest.
Yes.
So now Zadok the priest is to tell the people when they're going to keep the festivals, and the courses of the priest in the temple is going to be according to what Yah gave to David, that gave to Solomon, that Zadok the priest is going to be operating over and being a part of the administration of it. All right, so now in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there is a linkage. There is a marriage in the Dead Sea Scrolls of the priestly calendar that's described in detail in the Dead Sea Scrolls with the 24 courses of the priests. And so the two are interlinked with one another.
Yeah.
So the Dead Sea Scrolls describe a 6-year cycle of the priestly calendar that's in alignment with the priestly courses. So you have to know which year of the cycle that you are on in the present year. Because in year 1, week 1, we have a particular course. Now there's only 24 courses, but there's 52 weeks in the year. And so in a 52-week period, each course is going to fully serve twice. That's 48. And you got 49, 50, 51, 52. There's going to be 4 courses that's going to serve 3 times in the year. So now, what do you do in the first week in year number 2? Well, it's where we left off in the courses of the priests. And so we do the 24 complete, next 24, and then we have the next 4. And then in year 2, week 1, we're going to have that 5th course. So in year 1, week 1 of year 2 is going to be a different priestly course than year 1, week 1.
Yeah.
And so in order to know how to do these things, you have to not only know the calendar, but you need to know what year in the calendar you're at, because it is linked with the priestly courses. And so there's a lot of information that's given in the scrolls about how you're to make sure that things are in order in your calendar. For example, you're told in what particular year in the cycle that you're in, this is the course that serves at Passover. This is the course that serves at Tabernacles. And so you have to have things lined up. And then you're also told that, okay, when the new moon comes, okay, this is going to be the priest, and he's serving on this year, and he's serving on this day. Then you're going to be told about the phases of the moon and its end of 14 units. And so there's a reason why you're given all this information, because all this information collectively has to be aligned and match up. You can't just take one thing that's independent and say, well, I'm going to go with that. All these things have to be lined up and matched up according to how it's specified in the scrolls. And so then if you take 6 years, and there's 52 weeks in a year, so that means after 6 years, we will have 312 weeks. And so there's 24 courses of priests, and after 6 years, they're all going to serve 13 times. And so 24 times 13 is 312. So you're going to have the full service of all the priests after the conclusion of the 6-year cycle. And so this is a part of the information that you got that has to be related, associated, correlated with each other to make sure that everything together and everything is synced up. All right. So now remember Jeroboam? Jeroboam, he wouldn't go to Jerusalem, and in going to Jerusalem, he didn't go there to celebrate the feasts when it would have been done in Jerusalem through the Zadok priest, but instead he did his own thing. And so what Jeroboam did was not according to how the Zadok priests were keeping the festivals. And so stop and think of how things were right here with David and then the beginning of the rule of Solomon, because we're told that ultimately how things were under David, the beginning of Solomon, that the tabernacle of David, it eventually was going to fall. In other words, things were not going to be how it was then. And a part of the ministry and the message of Elijah in the restoration of all things is there's going to be a restoration of the tabernacle of David. And that restoration has multiple dimensions. It has multiple parts. And so in somehow and in some way, and it's not what I am particularly talking about in this session, but in Acts chapter 15, verse 16, it says, "After this I will return, and I will build again the tabernacle of David, which was fallen down." So somehow, in some way, what's going on in Acts 15 has something to do with inaugurating and initiating, and it's a part of the process to restore the tabernacle of David, which had fallen down. And so when Zadok the priest is ministering at the beginning of the reign of Solomon, Israel hadn't yet gone into Babylonian captivity. So, what's the probability that Zadok the priest is going to be keeping the festivals according to a Babylonian calendar, and he got the courses and how to do things? He just got it from David and Solomon. How that Zadok the priest is doing it is going to be exactly how Yah wanted it to be done. So from the time that Zadok is the priest clear through till we get into 2nd century BC, all the high priests in Israel were Zadok priests. And so there were Zadok priests until we go into the Babylonian captivity. So this list and this line is given to us in 1 Chronicles and chapter 6. So in 1 Chronicles in chapter 6, beginning in verse 3, and it goes through verse 15. We see this line. It says, the children of Amram was Aaron, Moses, and Miriam, and the sons of Aaron were Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. Now, beginning in verse 4, it's going to tell us the line of Eleazar. Remember, the eternal priesthood is going to be through the line of Eleazar. So Eleazar begat Phinehas, who was promised that eternal priesthood line. And if you go down through the lineage, there's a Zadok mentioned in verse 8. And then there's also a Zadok mentioned in verse 12. And so Zadok the priest is of the line and the lineage of Eleazar through Phinehas. And then we're told that the Zadok priest Jehozadak goes into Babylonian captivity. And so Ezra and Nehemiah details the return from Babylonian captivity. And Nehemiah chapter 12 is going to give you the priests that served from the return of the Babylonian captivity. Now, these priests served in what was called the Persian era, and that is the Persians came and defeated the Babylonians, and when they did that was the Persian era. But then Alexander the Great, the Grecian, came and defeated the Persians, and that inaugurated the Grecian era. And so there were Zadok priests that served through the Persian era, and this is in our Bible. But the Zadok priest in the priesthood that served during the Grecian era is not in our Bible. And so those priests are itemized by the historian Josephus. He tells us the priests that were in Israel during the Grecian period. And ultimately, things go down to an individual, a Zadok priest named Onias III. And what happens with Onias III and the succeeding ones after him, this information is in the book of Maccabees. You can find it in 1st and 2nd Maccabees, the details of what is going on then. So the last faithful Zadok priest was Onias III. Now, Onias is a Greek name, and his Hebrew name would be Yoni or Yochanan, and it could be rendered Jonathan, or it could be rendered John. And so in Ben Sirach, chapter 50, verse 1, it tells us that Onias is Yochanan in the Hebrew. And so the last faithful Zadok priest is Onias III, and then we have the corruption of the priesthood. So the corruption came in through the Greek influence, particularly the Greek Seleucids. And Antiochus Epiphanes IV was a Greek Seleucid. And so that's when the process of the Greek influence, the Greek corruption of Jerusalem, the temple, and the high priesthood came into being. So Onias III got killed, and ultimately, after the reign of Antiochus Epiphanes IV, the Greek Seleucid king following him, he, interestingly enough, made agreement with one of the 5 sons of Mattathias, and Mattathias and his 5 sons led a rebellion against Antiochus Epiphanes IV. But now, after Antiochus Epiphanes IV dies, the Greek Seleucid king after him makes an agreement with one of the 5 sons of Mattathias named Jonathan. And so, since the Maccabees had military charge of Israel, they made a political agreement. The king after Antiochus Epiphanes IV wanted to have some assurance if there was a civil uprising against him, or somebody came from the outside and threatened his rule and reign, that he would have backup, and he wanted one of the sons of Mattathias, Jonathan, to make an agreement that they would come to his aid if he needed it. And so there was money from the temple that was exchanged and offered as a part of this agreement. And then also the Greek Seleucid king then agreed to recognize initially Jonathan as the high priest in Israel, and then from Jonathan being the high priest in Israel, which was around the year 152 BC, that the family of Jonathan, called the Hasmonean dynasty, or the Maccabean Hasmonean dynasty, they were the high priests in Israel from 152 BC to 37 BC, and that's when Herod and the Romans come in, and that ended the Maccabean Hasmonean dynasty. So the Hasmoneans, the Maccabeans, they were Levites, just like Korah was. However, they were not of the family of Zadok. And so they weren't of the priestly line that Yah had now prophesied and brought forth from through the line of Eleazar, Phinehas, and then Phinehas, Zadok, and then the sons of Zadok. So the Hasmoneans, Maccabeans, were not of the priestly family of the Zadoks. So you might say that this was a Korah rebellion of the priesthood. So there were priests in Israel that were not designated by the God of Israel as specified back in the Torah. So now the question becomes, when this happens and the Zadok priests are then removed from their office, what then is going to be their response? So when they looked for a solution and an answer and a direction to their problem, because this is a very serious thing in Israel, because if the Greeks get influence in the temple, like what calendar is the Hasmoneans, the Maccabeans, what calendar are they going to be following in keeping the feast of Israel? Are they going to kick out the Zadok priests and keep their calendar? I mean, it was just kicking them out. They were going to keep the practices, or did the Greek influences come into the administration of the office of the high priesthood? So regarding this serious matter, they looked and they found direction in the scriptures in Isaiah in chapter 40 and verse 3, which says, a voice of him that cries in the wilderness, prepare the way of Yah, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. So this word desert is the Strong's number 6160. It's the Hebrew word Arava. Now Arava just doesn't mean desert. The Arava is actually a physical, geographical location in Israel. It's called the Rift Valley that goes and it begins in the Dead Sea area, and it goes down through in present Israel, the Red Sea area, but actually the Rift Valley extends and it goes into Africa. So they saw from Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3, that the solution to their situation, the direction, is given to them right here. They saw that this corruption is a sign of the end of days. That the Torah was being corrupted from outside influences, and they saw, hey, we're living in the end of days, and Messiah is going to come following these things. And Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3 says, prepare the way of the Lord. What does that mean? Prepare for the coming of the Messiah. So the preparation of the coming of the Messiah, Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3 says, is going to take place in the Arava. So they saw from this desecration that was taking place in the temple, from the corruption of the high priesthood, that they fled then and they started a community based upon this verse, and their purpose was to prepare themselves and be ready for the coming of the Messiah. So when they went there, the leadership over the community were Zadok priests, and they ended up having a religious dispute over authority, over when to celebrate the festivals, with a group that arose out of the Babylonian captivity, and this was the Pharisaic sect. Because the Pharisaic sect, they're claiming Torah authority. Their leadership are not the high priests in Israel. Their leadership is a group of people that studied in the Torah that became known as rabbis. And so now, given that in the history of Israel, the teaching of Torah was to come down and through the office of the high priesthood, as I will remind you, in Malachi in chapter 2, verse 1 and verse 6. Malachi chapter 2 and verse 1 and verse 6 says, and now, O ye priests, this commandment is for you. I keep saying verse 6. But it's Malachi chapter 2, verse 7. Malachi chapter 2, verse 7. For the priest's lips should keep knowledge, and they should seek the Torah at his mouth, for he is the messenger of Yahweh of hosts. So you're to seek the knowledge and the instruction on how to follow the Torah from the priests. And it comes down from the office of the high priest. So this is how things was done in Israel, particularly all the days that they had the temple. So now obviously in the Babylonian captivity, if there's leaders who study the Torah and they want to teach the Torah to the people, at the beginning of the process you can see an obvious question that the people would have regarding these leaders. It's like, well, what authority do you have from the Torah to be the teachers of the Torah? Because the teachers of the Torah should be coming down from the high priest and the priests that served in the temple. So the answer to that is they came up with what's called this doctrine of oral Torah. And the centrality of the doctrine of oral Torah is the doctrine of rabbinic authority. That they claim authority, And where they make the claim from is Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 8 through 10. Those verses where they claim their authority to be the teachers of the Torah, and they claim that their rulings are to be followed by all of Israel. So now they're claiming Torah authority in opposition to the Zadok priests, who actually are of the high priesthood, eternal priesthood lineage, and the Zadok priests are claiming that they're the authorities in Israel to teach Israel how to follow the Torah. And their authority dispute was centered on keeping the festivals, because the rabbis out of the Babylonian captivity, they said the festivals were to be followed according to the Babylonian calendar that they brought from Babylon, where the Zadok priests, as enumerated in detail in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they said the festivals are to be kept according to the priestly calendar. And they say that this priestly calendar, its origin came from the God of Israel through the angel Uriel, who gave it to Enoch. First Enoch chapter 74, verse 2. It was given to Enoch, then ultimately it was given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. However, when Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when they went into Egypt, they quit following that calendar because they were under Pharaoh's authority, and Pharaoh had his own calendar. And so, because they were following Pharaoh's calendar in Egypt, while they're in Egypt, they get a Torah calendar commandment in Numbers in chapter 12 and verse 2. It says, "This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. This shall be the first month of the year to you." So, what Judaism does is what Christianity does in the New Testament. They take their present beliefs and they read into it. They take their present beliefs and read into the, Paul supported our present beliefs. So they do the same thing to the Torah, that the Torah is supporting our doctrine and our belief system. So what this says in the Hebrew is Zahudash Rosh Hodash, and Rosh means that which is preeminent and that which is most important. It shall be the first month, Rishon. Rishon comes from Rosh. All right, so all that verse is saying, of the 12 months of the year, the first month is the most important of the 12. All 12 months don't have equal weight. The first one is the most important. Why is the first one most important? Because it's the first one where you start the year, and it's important which month that you start the year. And so this is a commandment about that, to get Israel back on to the proper calendar, because they were following Pharaoh's calendar in Egypt. And so ultimately, what the sin of the golden calf was, what the sin of Jeroboam was, it was mixed worship of the festivals. Okay, and what the northern kingdom did, we're going to go back and remind ourselves after reading it earlier, and we are going to go into 2 Kings in chapter 17. And remember, we read in verses 32 and 33 in a previous session that they feared Yah, but then they were doing the ways of the nations, which is called in 2 Kings chapter 17 verse 16, it's called Baal worship. Now, I want you to see what they did in their mixed worship, because I had pointed out to you in the previous session in 1 Kings in chapter 12 in verse 31, he made a house of high places, and he made priests of the lowest of the people that were not of the sons of Levi. And so those that are not designated Torah teachers in Israel comes from the office of the high priesthood and down. This is not who was teaching the people Torah in the northern kingdom. And so they had a corrupt priesthood that was teaching Torah to the people of the northern kingdom, and this corrupt priesthood did not keep the biblical festivals at the same time that they were designated to be kept. But yet they're expressing faith under the God of Israel. So I want to highlight for you now what the northern kingdom did, which is called Baal worship. They're worshiping Yah. 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 32 and 33. They feared Yah, but then it says in verse 33, they feared Yah and they served their own gods, and this is how they did it. They did it after the manner of the nations whom they carried away from there. I want you to grab a hold of that characteristic. Their mixed worship was they combined expression of faith in Yah, and they combined it with the way that the nations did things. And in particular, the highlight of the mixed worship was they were keeping the biblical festivals in the context of mixed worship. So now, if you grasp the concept that the Elijah ministry calls his people out of mixed worship, and the central focus of the mixed worship is his people are doing mixed worship and keeping the biblical festivals, and now the mixed worship in keeping the biblical festivals, they're doing it according to the ways of the nations. So now we need to ask ourselves, how is it that the nations kept time? What calendar did the nations use? What calendar did Pharaoh use? What calendar did King Nebuchadnezzar use? What calendar did Persia use? What calendar did Alexander the Great use? What calendar did Antiochus Epiphanes IV use? Okay, so those are all calendars of the nations. So we have one of two choices. Either Pharaoh kept Yah's calendar, Nebuchadnezzar kept Yah's calendar, Persia kept Yah's calendar, Alexander the Great kept Yah's calendar, and Antiochus Epiphanes IV kept Yah's calendar, or they're doing something opposite of Yah's calendar and they're following the ways of the nations. Those are your two choices. And so with that being mine, I want to now share with you some PowerPoint slides, and I want to share with you the calendar that the nations follow. Okay? So now, if you want to come, and I got a series of slides that I want to document and I want to show to you where the information comes from regarding the calendar that the nations of the world are following. Okay? Yep. So we're going to get this set up here. And then we're going to have the answer to our question. All right. So this is the book that I read on the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's about 625 pages. And so this is the book, and the authors are Michael Wise and Edward Cook and some other guy I can't read. But they're like one of three books or one of three authors that put out the translation of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Another author that did this was Vermes. And so this particular quote is coming from that book. And it says, ancient priests kept track of time as a way of serving God. For them, time was sacred. Its measurement is a sacred priestly task. This task gave rise to festival calendars. Calendars, or writings that presuppose them, comprise a very substantial percentage of the Dead Sea Scrolls. adherence to a particular calendar is the thread that runs through hundreds of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It is the calendar that makes the scrolls a collection. The calendar is the intentional element. The scrolls form a library because they all embrace one particular type of calendar. Therefore, if we want to understand the Dead Sea Scrolls, we must come to terms with their system of measuring sacred time. So one of the people that was on the Dead Sea Scroll project is this individual by the name of James Vanderkam. And he's the author of this book. So he actually worked on the project, and he says, from the very beginning of Qumran studies, the calendar played a significant role in scholarly research of the scrolls. So next, we are going to go to the moon. And once again, from James Vanderkam's book, he says, the moon served as a primary means for segmenting time in the ancient world. And from the book, The Dead Sea Scrolls, it says the ancient Egyptians held to a lunar calendar based upon the astronomical new moon. So now what I'm going to read to you, I'm going to read to you from the article of the Encyclopedia Britannica on what is the Egyptian calendar. In other words, what's the calendar that Pharaoh's following? What's the calendar that the children of Israel followed under Pharaoh? So it says, in addition, the ancient Egyptians maintained a calendar based upon the phases of the moon. The Egyptian lunar consisted of 12 months whose duration differed according to the length of a full lunar cycle, normally 28 or 29 days. Each lunar month began with the new moon, reckoned from the first morning after the waning crescent had become invisible, and was named after the major festival celebrated with it. Since the lunar calendar was 10 or 11 days shorter than the solar year on average, a 13th month, which the Egyptians called Thoth, was intercalated every several years to keep the lunar calendar in correspondence with the agricultural seasons. Okay, do you know enough about the calendar that the Orthodox Jews follow today? When you read that, that's the calendar that they follow today. Okay, that's what the Egyptians did. All right, so now we're going to take this book by Frank Parise, and all that he did is this book is about the calendars of the world. And now he's telling us about the Babylonian calendar. He says the Babylonian calendar is a good example of the general type of lunar calendar which was used in the Near and Middle East during early recorded history. It says the month was controlled by lunar motion, occasionally adjusted to keep pace with the movement of the sun. The Babylonian calendar had 12 months of 29 or 30 days, and if intercalation was made, it was invariably 29 days. And then it goes on to say that as with many of the calendars of this type, it goes on to describe the day, and it says the year began on the new moon nearest to the vernal equinox. The first month was called Nisanu. We say in English Nisan. And so here are the names of the Babylonian months. We have over here that you can recognize. The ninth month is called Kismo. We say Kislev. And the 10th month, Tibet. And the 12th month, Adar. And that we have the 13th month, it's Adar too. All right, so can you see here that this is the Babylonian calendar? Those are the Babylonian month names, and it was based upon the moon and the sighting of the moon. So next, this is an article by Sasha Stern. He's a professor at University College of London, and he's a professor of Jewish studies. and he has widely researched the Jewish and other calendars. And so he writes in his article, The Babylonian Calendar in the Bible, the use of Babylonian month names, which later become standard in the quote-unquote Jewish calendar, is hardly surprising in context of the post-exilic period. In other words, after the Jews went into Babylonian captivity. The Babylonian calendar originated in Babylon in southern Iraq, and it spread to the rest of Mesopotamia, and then became, in the first millennium BC, the official calendar of Assyria, Babylon, and Persian, and it was in use across the whole Near East. The Jews, under Persian rule, adopted the Babylonian calendar as its own calendar, as did many other peoples in the Persian Empire. So now, this is an article in Wikipedia Encyclopedia under Babylonian calendar, and it says, counting from the new moon, the Babylonians celebrated every seventh day as a holy day. You may have heard out there people advocating what they call lunar Sabbath. That when you have the first month and first day of the year, that's when you're supposed to count 7 days and keep the Sabbath. So we call that lunar Sabbath. And I just read to you that lunar Sabbath is something that the Babylonians did. And now I'm going to read to you from the Jewish Encyclopedia under the article of Babylonian calendar. It says, the Babylonian years are solely lunar, that is to say, the year of 12 months, containing on average 354 days, was bound to the solar year of 365 days by intercalating, as occasionally required a 13th month. Out of every 11 years, there were 7 with 12 months and 4 with 13th months. The Talmud states that the Jews got the names of the months at the time of the Babylonian exile. So in the priestly calendar in the Qumran, there is no month names for the months. And so Babylonian month names are exclusively to the lunar-based calendar adopted by the Pharisaic sect judicial court called the Sanhedrin after the exile. And it says in Exodus chapter 23, verse 13, that you shall not name the names of other gods. So now we're going to go back to the book by James Vanderkamp, and in reminder of what this individual, right here, Sasha Stern, professor at the University of College of London, when he wrote in his article, and a reminder of what he said is right at the top. He says, the Jews, after the Babylonian captivity, were using the official imperial calendar to determine the dates of biblical festivals is evident from the document that they found, which is the Passover papyrus from a Jewish colony in southern Egypt that is dated to 419 BC, and the Jews here observed the festivals of Passover and unleavened bread during the first month of the Babylonian calendar called Nisan. And so this is where we have the first evidence that they're following this Babylonian calendar. And so now there's an individual, B. Porton. He wrote a book published in 1990, and on page 32 it says, he concludes, there's no evidence for a Jewish calendar at this place in southern Egypt as being separate or distinct from the Babylonian calendar itself. So now James Vanderkamp says that this Babylonian calendar which the Persians later followed, was a lunar arrangement that was adjusted with the intercalary month 7 times in 19 years. So in the present quote-unquote Jewish calendar, how many times is there a leap month? 7 times in 19 years. Whoops, what did I do? All right, so now we got Babylon, Persia, and next Alexander the Great comes along. He's a Macedonian. So what is the Macedonian calendar? What is the calendar of Alexander the Great? And it says, like the Babylonian calendar, the Macedonian is a 354 lunar year calendar, intercalated month of 29 or 30 days. And so we can see that now Alexander the Great is using the Babylonian calendar that the Persians followed. And so this comes from, what is it? I think the Encyclopedia Britannica again. It says, after Alexander the Great's conquest of the Persian Empire, the Macedonian calendar, Alexander the Great's a Macedonian, so the calendar that Alexander the Great used came to be widely used by the Greeks. And then it says the Seleucids. So after the death of Alexander the Great, Greece was split up into 4 kingdoms under 4 generals, and to the north of Israel was the Greek Seleucids. To the south of Israel and Egypt is the Greek Ptolemies, and it was Antiochus Epiphanes IV, who was a Greek Seleucid, and Mattathias' son Jonathan made an agreement with the Greek Seleucids that the Greek Seleucids would recognize the office of the high priesthood being in the hands of the Maccabees. Mm-hmm. So the Seleucids, from their beginning, adapted the Macedonian year to the Babylonian 19-year cycle. So now the Greek Seleucids are following the Babylonian calendar. So this is an article on the Greek Seleucid calendar, and it says the Greek Seleucid calendar consisted of 12 lunar months, 354 days a year, and the Seleucid calendar is based upon the Babylonian calendar, and the basic difference of the 2 calendars is the Greek Seleucid calendar, the months are named after Greek gods instead of Babylonian gods. So this is an article under Babylonian calendar in the Wikipedia Encyclopedia. It says the Babylonian calendar is a lunisolar calendar with years consisting of 12 lunar months, each beginning when a new crescent moon was first sighted low in the western horizon at sunset. And so the Babylonian calendar cites the new moon, and once you cite the new moon on the Babylonian calendar, once you cite the new moon, you start a new Babylonian month, and the first day of that month is following the sighting of the new moon. So in the 1st century, the Pharisees cited the new moon, and there was an adaptation to the Babylonian calendar through mathematical calculations, and this adaptation is called the Hillel calendar. So now this comes from the Wikipedia Encyclopedia, and on the left-hand column here is the month names as they were in Babylon. The next column is the Babylonian gods associated with those names. And then here over on the right here is the current Hebrew name into the English, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, and then the Gregorian time that's associated with it. So Yah says to Zion, he says, deliver yourself, O Zion, that dwells with the daughter of Babylon. So his people, his bride, is dwelling with the daughter of Babylon. So I'm going to conclude what I'm about to say now. So I'm done with that. And so if you could help put that away, and then I'll bring my stand back over here. So while he does that, what I'm trying to show you is that part of the sin of the northern kingdom is in fearing Yah and representing their faith in the God of Israel, that they mixed it with the ways of the nations. And so I just showed you the calendar of the nations, of Egypt, of Babylon, of Persia, of Alexander the Great, and the Greek Seleucids. And so ask yourself a simple question. Is the current calendar that Orthodox Judaism is following, which they call Jewish calendar, which others say, well, that's the biblical calendar. Others say, well, that's the Torah calendar. Are they following a calendar that the nations follow, or are they following a unique calendar? They're following what the nations follow. So you have one of two things. Either Pharaoh and Nebuchadnezzar and Alexander the Great and Antiochus Epiphanes were all faithful to follow Yah's calendar, or the present Judaism, Orthodox Judaism, they adapted this calendar from the Babylonian captivity. So if you're trying to make an argument to me that what the Jewish people are currently doing is the biblical calendar, and I'm showing you that this is what the nations of the world did, are they really following the Babylonian calendar? Because Yah said his people is not to be like the nations. They're to be separated from the nations. They're going to be holy from the nations. Okay. The calendar that the Zadok priests followed, which they claim came from Enoch, that was passed down to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that Pharaoh didn't follow, that they started again to follow in the wilderness, and they followed up to the time of Solomon, and it was followed by the Zadok priests clear down through the Zadok line. The Dead Sea Scrolls tells us that that is a 364-day calendar. Now ask yourself a question. Could you tell me one nation on planet Earth besides Israel and the calendar that's there? One nation on planet Earth that ever followed that calendar? There is none. That calendar is unique to Israel. Now, what about the calendar that the Orthodox uses? Any other nation of the world ever followed that calendar? Yeah, I just showed you them all. Okay, so now the Torah requires us to have equal weights and measures. So it is an unequal weight and measure if you say what Christianity is doing is so wrong. They're keeping Christmas and Easter. It's so wrong. And they're involved in mixed worship, and it's so wrong. And then you exchange the Christian mixed worship for the present day Jewish mixed worship. And are you going to tell me that because it's Jewish, that the Jewish mixed worship is okay, but the Christian one is wrong? Or are we going to have an equal weights and balance, that mixed worship is mixed worship, and it doesn't matter if we put the stamp on it, Christianity and Yeshua, or we put the stamp on it, Torah and Moses, like mixed worship is mixed worship. So, in order that I can amplify the point that I'm trying to bring here, is am I like picking out of the air something that, hey, I can stir a controversy with, and let's pick a controversy that we all can debate and be divided over, and I don't know, this is a good one that we can debate. Or is this just not some issue that's a side issue? Is this really a critical issue? And I'm trying to specify to you that this is a part of the ministry and the message of Elijah, that the mixing is the sin of the golden calf. The sin is the sin of Jeroboam. And it's the ministry and the message of Elijah that points out the mixture and calls Yah's people out of the mixture. Now let me show you what Yah said in the Torah, what is a necessary condition for him to end the exile of his people. Okay? It's in Leviticus chapter 26, and beginning in verses 40 to 42. It says, if they confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their fathers with their trespass, which they trespassed against me, and that they've walked contrary to me, and that I've walked contrary to them, and I brought them into the land of their enemies, if then, while they're in exile, if their uncircumcised hearts be humbled, in other words, they departed from the Torah, and they accept the punishment of their iniquity, then will I remember my covenant with Jacob, my covenant with Isaac, and my covenant with Jacob will I remember, and I will remember the land. So why hasn't Yah come back? Why hasn't Yeshua come back yet? Because the fullness of the ministry of Elijah is not present with us. So we've started the ministry and the message of Elijah, and people are hearing the ministry and the message of Elijah, but as long as we're still stuck in mixed worship and celebrating the biblical festivals, we haven't yet come out. And so the message and ministry of Elijah is a calling to come out of that mixed worship, and this issue now becomes an issue in the historical and cultural setting of the New Testament, because now we have somebody that's John the Baptist. We're told he has the ministry and the message of Elijah, and he says that he's Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 3. So when he says he's Isaiah chapter 40 verse 3, he is now linking himself with the community in the Qumran, who is led by Zadok priest, who is following this priestly calendar, and they are claiming authority through the Zadok priests, and they're in contention with not only the corrupt temple system of the Sadducees, but they're in they're in competition with the Pharisees. All right? So now John the Baptist comes in the scene. He's being brought up in the Qumran community. Now it says in the Dead Sea Scrolls that anyone who becomes a community member, they must take an oath. It's not like you, I think I should do it this way. And your neighbor says, well, I think I should do it that way. They didn't have that independence. If you joined the community, you had to take an oath in joining the community that you was going to submit to the authority of the Zadok priests, and you're to keep the festivals when the Zadok priest says that the community is going to keep the festivals according to the priestly calendar. So if that's a requirement of the community, and John the Baptist grows up in the community, okay, that's your data. Okay, we've done our research, we found this conclusion. Now we can ask the question, which calendar do you think John the Baptist followed? Do you think he followed the Pharisaic one? Or do you think he followed the one in the Qumran? Now, if you've come to a conclusion that he probably likely followed the one in the Qumran, let me tell you who John the Baptist is. He's of the spirit and the power of Elijah. Hallelujah. So what that means is the Elijah ministry and message proclaims Isaiah chapter 40 verse 3, and it proclaims in the debate and the conflict over authority, it is going to affirm the authority of the Zadok priest and the Zadok priesthood. So one of the things that needs to be restored in Israel is there needs to be a restoration of the Zadok priesthood. So the question is, how would you today restore the Zadok priesthood? Is it by somebody coming through the door and say, hello, I've done my genealogy research, and I'm a Zadok priest, and I'm going to tell you what to do. And then we believe him and we do it. Is that how it's going to be? No. That's not how it's going to be. You restore the priesthood when you restore their authority. And you restore their authority when you submit to their authority. And how do you submit to their authority? The primary thing that they were given authority over, and I'm going to show you in the scriptures, the authority is in Ezekiel in chapter 44. Ezekiel chapter 44, and we're told, we're talking about the sons of Zadok, Ezekiel chapter 44, verse 15, it says the priests, the Levites, the sons of Zadok, that kept the charge of my sanctuary when the children of Israel went astray from me, they will come near to me to minister unto me, and they shall stand before me to offer the fat and the blood, says Yahweh Elohim. The subject is the Zadok priests. And so now what is Yah going to say about the Zadok priests? It says in verse 23, they're going to teach my people the difference between the holy and the profane. And they're going to distinguish and teach you regarding the clean and the unclean. Verse 24 is the key verse. In controversy. That's Torah controversy. This is a reference to, in controversy is a reference to Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 8 through 11, which Orthodox Judaism claims is their authority. So in authority, they, that is the Zadok priests, they will stand in judgment, and they will judge it according to my judgments, and they will keep my laws and my statutes, and they will keep my moedim. They will keep my festivals, and they will hallow my Sabbath. So let's answer the question. How do we restore the Zadok priesthood? By submitting to their authority. How do we submit to their authority? They've already told and given us the priestly calendar by which they followed. So when we keep the feasts according to that priestly calendar, we're submitting yourselves to the authority of the Zadok priest instead of the authority of the rabbis, instead of the authority of the Sanhedrin. And when you submit to their authority, now you're restoring their priesthood. And this is one of the things that's a part of the ministry of Elijah, to restore all things. So the last thing I want to say is that the reason why I view and I see their authority as being biblical is right here, this verse, Ezekiel 44:24. This tells me how Yah sees the situation. He has declared that the Zadok priest, he recognizes the authority that he's given them to tell us when to keep the biblical festivals. Now, if that is the case, this is also the way that I do it. Okay? I can't say I accept in principle the priestly calendar and then I'm going to go figure out how it works. And say, oh, I figured out how it works, and we're going to do it this way. No, you have to go how they did it. You have to research how they did it, and you have to do it according to how they do it. And that's the proper way to follow and submit to their authority, is you do it how they did it. You don't do it independent from how they do it. So how you got to know how they did it? You got to study the scrolls. You got to go through all the details of the calculations. You got to see all the information they give. Because all the information they gave you is for the purpose of how to follow the calendar correctly. So if we throw out the information that they've given us and say, oh, I figured it out, you're not submitting to their authority. You're doing your own thing on behalf of a guidance that they've given them. You haven't submitted to their authority. And so this is why and how the restoration of the Zadok priesthood and to come out of the mixed worship system of keeping the biblical festivals, how this is part of the Elijah ministry and message that needs to be taught, and the bride will listen to the message and make herself ready for the coming of her bridegroom. So thank you for letting me share this fifth session. We have one more session to go and wrapping things up. And so once again, I'd like to end the session by saying I want to give Yeshua all praise, glory, and honor for who he is, because he's the one that deserves all of our praise, glory, and honor, because he is the King of Kings. He is the Lord of Lords. And so we praise him for who he is. Shalom. Yeshua.
Shalom.